I'm prepping to become a first-time home buyer in 2025, and I don't know why, but home ownership stirs up so much debate. People are so opinionated about this topic. Some people think that home ownership is the best way to get ahead financially, and other people think that buying a house will completely wreck your financial situation. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. This is going to be part 1 of my home ownership series. So if you're interested in a lot more first-time home buyer content, make sure to subscribe to my channel. And in this video, we're going to be talking through why I want to buy, how I knew that home ownership was right for me, deciding where I want to buy, and then actually running the numbers to see if it makes more sense to rent or buy. I've been thinking about this for so long, and 2025 is my year, so I'm so excited to start making more content about this. But with that, I have a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. Before we get into the numbers, comparing whether or not it makes sense to rent or buy, I want to talk about why I want to buy a house and why I think home ownership is right for me. Because as you're going to see when we're running the numbers, this is not a video that is like, you're throwing away your money renting and I could buy a mansion for the amount of money that I spend in rent. Really not that at all. It's actually really hard to make the numbers make sense in the short term when you're becoming a first-time home buyer and buying a house. But overarchingly, when I think about what financial freedom means to me, financial freedom means work freedom, as in retirement. I talked about this idea of retirement in my investing video that I posted a couple weeks ago. But essentially in that video, I was talking about how retirement is a number, not an age. As in, once you get to a point where your passive income streams, your investment portfolio can cover your monthly expenses, that's when you're able to retire. And especially talking with my parents lately, because they're in their mid-60s and they're prepping for retirement, I feel like what I always hear them say is, well, we're going to be able to retire one day because we don't have a mortgage anymore. They paid off their house 5 or 10 years ago, so retirement is possible for them because their monthly fixed expenses are super low because they don't have any debt anymore. So in my head, I'm like, okay, financial freedom means retirement. Retirement means no mortgage. Getting to a point where you don't have a mortgage means at some point you do have to get a mortgage, and you do need to start that process of buying a home so that one day you can own your home outright. So basically, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is financial freedom to me, it means owning a home, having no mortgage on that home. And in my head, the earlier that I start that process, the earlier I can get my house paid off and the earlier that I can reach financial freedom. The second reason that I want to buy a house in 2025 might come across as a little bit of an untraditional reason for home ownership, but I really want to own property in my name and in my name only before marriage. I grew up in a household where my mom always told me to never rely on a man financially, or at least 100% rely on a man financially. My parents don't have all of their money in a joint bank account. My mom was a bank teller for most of her career and told me basically never to keep all of your money in a joint bank account. She just really always instilled in me, like, despite them having a great marriage, that you never want to totally depend financially on a man, because you never want to be in a situation where you can't leave a relationship because of your finances. I've definitely said in other videos before that that is a big reason why I wanted to start investing as early as I did. But I also see home ownership in my 20s before I'm married just another way to own an asset that will always be mine, just in case, if God forbid, I ever needed somewhere to live. I don't know, it's just always been a goal of mine to own property in my name and in my name only. I'll be 26 this year, so I'm entering that chapter where starting to think about marriage, starting to think about children. So home ownership feels right for me in this era. As for the considerations for why I think home ownership is right for my lifestyle, because there are totally people out there whose lifestyles do not make sense for buying a home in their 20s or even in their 30s. If you live in a big city where prices are absurd, if you're living somewhere where you don't know if you want to stay there long term, if you're a city person and you absolutely need to live downtown in a city, there are so many reasons why your lifestyle wouldn't make sense for buying, but I'm going to talk about a few reasons why home ownership makes sense for my lifestyle. First one is that I have officially decided that Pittsburgh is definitely where I want to be long term. I'm from the Pittsburgh area. I'm currently living in Nashville. I moved to Nashville last year. I've talked about this in a couple of my other videos, but basically me moving to Nashville this year made me realize that Pittsburgh definitely is where I want to end up long term. I kind of got the whole like moving to a new city in my 20s thing out of my system, and honestly, I just feel super neutral about the city that I live in at this point. When I moved down here, I was like, yeah, Nashville's cool, but I'm in my apartment 20 some hours a day anyway. I'm such a homebody. I love being home. I don't go out. Outside of having a couple good friends here, I have absolutely no reason to be in Nashville, so Pittsburgh is definitely the only city that I would purchase in. Since I made that decision that yes, yes, I do want to move back to Pittsburgh. I had to ask myself, do I want to move into a different apartment in Pittsburgh or do I want to buy? And ultimately, I was kind of at a point where I'm like, I'm just tired of moving apartments every 1 to 2 years. I have moved literally every single year since graduating from college and I'm so sick of it. Moving is so expensive. I've spent $5,000 to $10,000 every single time I've moved. And then when I'm in these apartments, I never really feel settled because I know that it's short term. I'll get to a point where I'm 3 or 4 months into my lease and I'm like, well, I'm tired of dumping money into this place. I'm not gonna buy any decorations. I'm not gonna spend any time hanging things on the wall because I know I'm probably gonna move out of here. I feel like I'm at a point where I'm just ready to really invest in my space and be somewhere where I know I'm gonna be there for a decent amount of time. And with that, the last one is that I had to ask myself, is this a place that I'm going to live for the next 5 years? They say when you buy a house, if you don't plan on living there for 5 to 7 years, the numbers are never gonna make sense. I had to ask myself, okay, Erin, if you're gonna buy, are you going to be comfortable staying put for 5 years? And when I asked myself that question, I realized that this was actually the perfect time in my life to purchase my first home. Looking at townhouses, and ideally when I purchase, this is the house that I live in until I have my children and move into my family home. I'll be 26 this year and I wanna start having kids around the age of like 29 or 30. Ideally, I probably will be in this house until the age of like 32, 33, 34, until my kids start to get to an age where we need more space, we need to consider school districts, all of those things. So thinking through that timeline, I'm like, okay, if I know it's a goal that I'm going to purchase property in my name only, and I know eventually I do want to enter the chapter where I'm getting married, I'm having kids, now really is the perfect time to start the home buying process and be somewhere where I could see myself for the next 5 to 6 years. Like I said, I am looking in the Pittsburgh area for wanting to buy my home, and in my opinion, the market is going to be the biggest factor on whether or not buying makes any sense. Pittsburgh is my home city. I grew up like an hour or so outside of the city, so I know the city, but then I also know the suburbs very, very well. I'm such a suburban girl, I always have been, so I am looking in the suburbs. I'm not looking in the city center, which like my wallet will thank me for. But Pittsburgh actually is consistently ranked as one of the best cities for first-time home buyers. I'm obviously biased, but I think it's the perfect size city. You still get a lot to do, but since it's a smaller city, you obviously get lower prices than a lot of the bigger cities. Just knowing that a big reason why I do want to purchase in Pittsburgh is because I want to be around my family. If my family was from a city that the prices were a lot higher, like if my family was from San Francisco, this would definitely be an entire different conversation, and I would say that it makes zero sense for me to buy and I'll just continue renting. There are a ton of resources online that have things like rent versus buy calculators, or they have maps that'll show you which cities are better for renting versus better for buying. For me, even in Pittsburgh, if I absolutely wanted to be in the city center, things would be a lot more expensive and it probably wouldn't make any sense. But since I am willing to be more in the suburbs, the numbers do kind of make more sense for me. Now let's get into the numbers, because like I said, it is really hard to make these numbers make sense in the short term. This is not a video that is like, you're wasting all of your money renting. I can buy a mansion with the amount of money that I spend in my rent. I feel like I get comments on my videos all the time that'll say stuff like that and be like, you're spending way too much money in rent. My 4,000 square foot home has a mortgage that's lower than that. Today's prices, that's just simply not the case. But obviously, regardless of the numbers that I'm about to share, this isn't like turning me off of the home buying process just because I can't get a mortgage that is significantly under my cost of rent. There is still, in my opinion, a lot of benefit to buying a home, starting to build equity, especially in the long term. But regardless, home ownership is a huge financial decision, and we're gonna talk about all of these costs. Before we get into the numbers, I think it's helpful to have something to compare it to. My rent currently in Nashville for a 2-bed, 1-bath apartment, it's probably like around 1,000 square feet. My rent when my lease is up in August will be at minimum $2,900 a month. I say at minimum because right now I pay like $2,300 a month, but the only reason why my rent is so affordable is because I got a really good leasing special when I moved into this place, and they like prorated the leasing special across all of my month's rent, brought my rent down from $2,900 to $2,300. So when my lease is up, that leasing special is no longer going to be there. So if they don't increase my rent at all, it's going to be $2,900 a month. I feel like a lot of people end up in these situations and then they're like, well, it makes more sense for me to just move to another place because the other place has a leasing special. And that's how you get into the groove of moving once every 1 to 2 years. It's exhausting and I'm tired of it, and I'm ready to just be in a place that I'm going to be in for the next 5-6 years. Now, if I moved back to Pittsburgh and I was looking to rent somewhere that would be a similar size, the amount of space that I'm looking for in the townhome that I want to buy, I would probably be looking at minimum $2,500 a month. That's for an apartment. That's probably for like a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment in Pittsburgh. If I wanted to rent a townhome in the areas that I'm looking at, that would be like $3,500 a month. Comparing rent is definitely not a one-to-one comparison because I'm comparing like the size of an apartment versus the size of a townhome, and obviously there's a lot more space in a townhome. But anyway, obviously the first cost that we have to consider is the purchase price. My budget for my first home is $500,000, which this is definitely a high budget. I'm not discounting that at all. However, I've been doing a ton of research on Zillow for the last like 4 or 5 months. Basically, the biggest thing that I'm going to be splurging on is the location. Like I said, I am looking in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. I'm not going to tell you exactly where because I don't want to share the location that I hopefully end up in. But even though I'm looking in the suburbs, I am looking in like nicer areas. And also the biggest thing that I'm splurging on is proximity to the highway. If I'm going to be in the suburbs, I don't want to feel like I'm an hour away from the city. I don't want it to take me an hour to get into the city to like see my friends or go out to eat. And I do feel like location is one of those things that when you splurge on it, it typically does retain its value. A home in a really good location in a good school district is generally a safe bet for not going down in value. So location is totally something that I'm willing to splurge on. Definitely could go to a not as nice location, more so the area that I used to live in Pittsburgh, and find something nice for around the like $380 to $400 mark. But again, I think in the long term, I will really appreciate that I prioritize location and ended up where I want to be, because location does do a lot for your quality of life. And I've noticed that over the last couple of years. Second thing that I'm willing to splurge on, I feel like I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this, but it is the aesthetics of the home. I told myself when I was deciding on whether or not I wanted to purchase that I didn't want to purchase and spend all of this money and then hate where I live. Definitely gotten spoiled with like the luxury apartment complexes because everything is completely brand new. So when I'm looking on Zillow and I'm seeing these townhomes for $300,000, $400,000, which is still a lot of money, and they're totally outdated and I'm gonna hate every single thing about them. I just can't bring myself to spend that money in that way. I also obviously know that when you own your home, you can update things. However, I have zero experience updating homes, so I would have zero idea what I'm getting into price-wise for home renovations, which is also something that I'm willing to splurge on when I'm renting. I'm spending a ton of money in rent to be in a luxury apartment where everything is nice and new and updated and there's natural light, and I truly love my space because like I said, I am such a homebody and I'm here 20+ hours a day, and if there's one thing I'm gonna splurge on in my budget, it's my housing. Now let's talk about the down payment, because 20% of $500 is $100,000. When I show the monthly payments, I'm gonna show an example of a 20% down payment and then also a 5% down payment if I did choose to only put 5% down, because I already know there's gonna be people in the comments telling me that I don't have to put 20% down, which I don't, I definitely don't. There are a ton of mortgage options out there that you can put 3%, 5% down. That could work for a lot of people, but when I was kind of going through whether or not that made sense for me, I had to bring it back to, again, what financial freedom means to me. It means eventually having no mortgage, so eventually paying my mortgage off and having no debt. So putting way less down and financing a lot more kind of defeats that purpose and goes against that goal. The big benefit of starting this process early, before I have kids, before I'm getting married, I have some more discretionary income. Ideally, I can make extra payments whenever it makes sense and hopefully pay that mortgage down quicker to work toward the goal of having no debt at some point in my life. So putting 5% down sounds really enticing, but it doesn't make sense for me and my financial goals. Next cost to consider is closing costs, and I have budgeted $20,000 for closing costs. I do hope it ends up being less. I would love for that to be the case, but I have talked to some lenders to get good estimates for the rest of these numbers, which you'll see. The lenders that I've talked to have told me to budget $20,000 for closing costs. Next thing to consider is your interest rate. Again, I have gone through the process of talking to a few lenders, which I highly recommend because all of these costs are going to look totally different depending on the area that you're trying to purchase in. It is never too early to talk to a lender. I thought that I had to be like ready to buy by the time I started talking to a lender. That is totally not the case. I do have a tool that I'll put in the description of this video, which helps you like compare current mortgage rates and find lenders and things like that. All of the quotes that they were giving me, they were using a 6% interest rate. Now I'm not buying or closing on a home until the summer, and I have zero idea what's gonna happen with interest rates in the next 6 months. I'm hoping they're not gonna go up. I would love for that to be the case, but I'm also preparing for the fact that they potentially could be. But for the purpose of this video, we are going to use a 6% interest rate. The next cost to consider is property taxes, and I think this is the area that it's most beneficial to talk to a lender, because your property taxes are going to completely differ depending on where you live. The area that I'm looking at in Pittsburgh has lower property taxes, but if I were to go closer to the city, this number could be significantly higher. So this is like definitely something to consider in your budget, and talking to a lender is really the only way that you're going to get a super accurate estimate on what property taxes can look like. The lenders that I talked to told me to budget about $450 a month for property taxes. And the last one is an HOA, and I am budgeting $200 a month for an HOA fee. HOA stands for Homeowners Association. Essentially, you'll find these in almost all townhome complexes and even in some single family communities as well. But essentially, this is kind of an amenity fee. Most HOAs will like mow your grass and shovel your snow. There's a pool or a gym, anything like that. People love to hate on HOAs, and the biggest reason for that is because it's not really a fixed price. Like, they can increase your HOA in the future. I love an HOA, and that's the biggest reason why I chose a townhome, because I don't want to mow my grass, I don't want to shovel my snow, I don't want to take care of like the exterior maintenance of my house. I pay a $125 amenity fee at my current apartment, so in my mind it's kind of the same thing. A lot of people have told me to make sure that you do your due diligence for the HOA that you're going to inevitably purchase. You basically want to make sure that the HOA is not underfunded, because if it's underfunded, then they probably will increase it significantly in the future. Probably something to talk to your real estate agent about before you purchase a home. With these numbers, that would bring my total monthly payment to $3,148. After spending $100,000 on a down payment, I would still be paying more monthly on my mortgage and taxes and fees and all of that than paying my rent. Now, if I decided to do a 5% down payment, which I'm not, but we're still going to go through those numbers, my monthly payment would be $3,597, so roughly a $400 a month difference to save $75,000 up front. Now, so many people have been in my comments being like, why would you put that $75,000 onto your down payment? You should just put it into the stock market. You'd make so much more money in the stock market over a 30-year period than having it down on your home. So I ran those numbers too, and if I were to put that $75,000 in the stock market, in 30 years, I could have approximately $754,000. Now, on the flip side of that, if I did put 20% down and instead I invested the difference of my monthly payment, so my monthly payment would have been like $3,500 versus $3,100. That difference was $449, and if I invested $449 a month for 30 years, I could have $610,000. So yes, theoretically, I could put 5% down, I could invest $75,000, and I could end up with about $150,000 more in the stock market in 30 years. But looking back to what financial freedom means to me and the goal of becoming debt-free as soon as possible, it makes no sense for me to do that regardless. And the last big consideration for home ownership is considering your credit. I feel like I could make an entire video on this because credit is one of the biggest things that's going to determine whether or not it makes sense for you to buy a home. My credit score is close to an 800, which means that I could probably qualify for as good of an interest rate as possible at that time. But if my credit score was like 100 points lower, then I could be getting into a situation where even if interest rates are around 6%, I could only qualify for a rate at like 6.5% to 7% or something like that. So my cost to borrow would be so much higher because my credit score is lower. With that being said, I am making sure to not do anything that could potentially change my credit over the next 6 months. I'm not opening a credit card, I'm not closing a credit card, I'm not gonna miss a payment over the next 6 months. I'm super diligent to make sure that my credit score stays as high as possible for when I close on my home. I hope this video was helpful. If you are trying to prepare to become a first-time home buyer, please let me know what your questions are in the comments and I can make a follow-up to this video. I will also put in the description of this video all of my favorite tools and resources for how I organize my money, how I'm preparing to become a first-time home buyer, tools that I'm using to prepare to become a first-time home buyer, and all of that. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you liked and subscribed to my channel, and thanks for following along.